If you just started Servant of the Lake, you've probably already realized that working at the Vanderboom Mansion isn't exactly a normal job. The puzzles seem simple at first, but they quickly turn into a mix of logic, attention to detail, and that disturbing atmosphere typical of Rusty Lake. In this video, let's get straight to the point. 10 quick and essential tips for you to solve the puzzles without getting stuck. I'm Mary, and the video is about to start. One tip that is a real lifesaver is to pay full attention to the paintings and home decorations, because many important clues are hidden right there. These Vanderboom family portraits aren't just there for decoration. They often provide numbers, directions, and even patterns that unlock safes and locks. The detail that makes all the difference is that a quick glance is almost never enough. Sometimes you need to straighten the frame, dust it off, or interact with the painting to notice a gesture, a shadow, or some tiny element that changes everything. And that's very Rusty Lake. The game loves hiding the answer in what seems to be just part of the setting. In the case of the Vanderboom family portraits, it's worth observing even simple things, like how many times a character blinks, where they point, or what movement they make. In several puzzles, these actions turn into direct codes, so ignoring a painting can mean staying stuck for a long time unnecessarily. When I see this kind of visual clue, I immediately treat it as if the entire house is trying to speak to me without using words. So whenever you enter a new room, first look at the paintings as if they were part of the puzzle, not just decoration. Straighten them, clean them, examine them closely, and compare them with the rest of the scenery, because this pattern repeats quite often and usually unlocks the solution faster than guessing in the dark. In a game like this, the patience to observe details is almost always more valuable than blindly clicking on everything. I think it's very important to never underestimate the animals and creatures that appear around the property. Horses, cats, and crows aren't just there to bring the scenery to life. They are directly part of the progression, and at several moments, they are the ones that unlock the next step. The game turns simple interactions into puzzle solutions. Giving a carrot to the horse, offering milk, or using a mouse with the cat, or paying attention to how the crow reacts can reveal keys and hidden items that you probably would never find just by searching the room on your own. It seems like a minor detail, but these interactions are usually mandatory. This kind of design fits the game's identity well, because it makes you look at the property as a living ecosystem, not just a map of rooms. Sometimes the answer isn't in a drawer or a painting, but in a creature's reaction to the right item. And once you understand that, the game starts making a lot more sense. I treat every animal as a moving clue. If something is standing still and apparently purposeless, it's worth testing what it wants, what it accepts, and how it reacts, because Servant of the Lake likes hiding progress in seemingly secondary interactions. And honestly, that's the kind of detail that makes the game outsmart inattentive players. One thing I consider essential is never trusting that a room stays the same after a transition. Whenever the game changes chapters or advances the time of day, I recommend looking at the room again as if you were entering it for the first time, because what previously seemed empty might now hide something important. This is the kind of detail that makes all the difference in this game. Drawers, cabinets, tables, and corners that had nothing can suddenly hold matches, cloths, tools, or other household items that unlock the next step of the puzzle. And as the mansion changes over time, the solution often isn't about searching further away, but about revisiting the same space with fresh eyes. I really like this design because it genuinely rewards attentiveness, not just trial and error. Sometimes a player overlooks an item simply because they had already checked that piece of furniture before and assumed there was nothing there. But the game is constantly altering the state of the rooms. So, when the story progresses, it's worth treating each environment as an updated version of itself. If you build the habit of re-examining every corner after each shift in the day or chapter, you start finding items that seem small but unlock an entire chain of progression. In a game like this, the secret isn't just exploring the mansion, it's revisiting everything, knowing that the scenery might have changed without warning. One thing I found very clever is that the game's logic doesn't follow real-world common sense. You start by doing ordinary, almost domestic chores, and suddenly you're in the middle of something strange, dark, and completely out of the ordinary. And precisely because of that, when a solution seems too absurd, I already suspect it might just be the right one. This is the kind of game that teaches you to unlearn things a bit. Doing laundry, serving tea, or preparing porridge aren't just normal chores. Inside the mansion, they become part of a much more bizarre machinery, almost as if every simple action were connected to a macabre experiment. And I really like this mix because it makes every puzzle feel like a step within a ritual, not just an isolated task. The main point here is not to try and solve everything with traditional logic. If you're looking at an item and thinking, this would never make sense, that might be the exact reason it works. This kind of surreal reasoning is a strong trademark of the game, and embracing it early on prevents a lot of unnecessary frustration. The best mindset is this: treat each puzzle as part of a world where the strange is normal. When you stop looking for by-the-book answers and start accepting unlikely combinations, the game opens up much more. And honestly, that's where Servant of the Lake gets most fun, because it makes you feel that the right solution is almost always in the most unexpected place. Dialogues with the masters and the other servants don't just provide context, they practically dictate what you need to do on that day. When the game seems too vague, going back to a character usually unlocks the next clue without any hassle. I really like this approach because it matches the game's personality well. Instead of running around chasing random solutions, the best path is often to listen carefully again because the character might repeat the instruction or complete the missing piece of information. Sometimes the answer's right there all along, but the game wants you to confirm the right detail. This is even more relevant when you've already picked up an item but don't know exactly who to give it to or how to use it. In many cases, clicking on the character once more makes them reiterate the order, mention something that was missing, or even clarify which object is being requested. And this kind of repetition isn't a waste of time, it's part of the game's logic. This tip helps a lot to avoid silly roadblocks. Whenever a task seems incomplete or confusing, I treat the conversation as a living clue and go back to the character before trying to invent a solution. In Servant of the Lake, paying attention to what the residents say can be just as important as examining the scenery.
Objects like mugs, coins, tools, and other collected items almost always have a practical use in locks, boxes, and mechanisms scattered across the screen, so it's worth experimenting a lot, rather than just hoarding everything aimlessly. The game also really likes visual organization puzzles, and that's something I found quite characteristic of it. Numerical order, stripes, size, sequence, and repeating patterns appear frequently. So when you encounter a challenge that seems to be just about tidying things up, you're usually on the right track. This kind of logic is very common in puzzles like the pewter mugs, where the secret lies in noticing the pattern before trying to guess. Sometimes the right item has been in your hands from the start, but the game wants you to figure out where in the scene it fits and how it interacts with the visual pattern of that puzzle. And that makes each room feel more interactive, because almost anything can turn into a clue or an answer. I treat every inventory item as a real possibility, not just something to use at the obvious moment. If a box, a lock, or a mechanism looks suspicious, test what you found and see if there's a hidden logic of order or repetition there. In Servant of the Lake, this attitude usually saves a lot of time and prevents you from getting stuck on something that was actually much simpler than it seemed. One of the best things you can do in Servant of the Lake is to keep a notepad nearby. The game constantly works with specific years, codes, quantities, and direction sequences, and relying solely on memory can turn an interesting puzzle into a frustrating session. Whenever an important number appears, like 1753, write it down immediately. The same goes for any sequence of movements, button order, or direction indicated by a character or object. At times, a piece of information might seem useless, but it can become essential several minutes later. I also recommend categorizing your notes: numbers, codes, directions, and action sequences. This makes everything much easier to check when you find a panel or mechanism that looks familiar. Instead of trying random combinations, you can refer back to the clues and test the solution with purpose. This tip seems simple, but it saves plenty of time and prevents that annoying hassle of repeating the same actions until you hit the mark by chance. Servant of the Lake is much more enjoyable when you treat every clue as part of a small investigative notebook, because solving the puzzle stops depending on luck and starts depending on your own observation. Don't be afraid to restart the chapter. If you notice that you used an important item and suddenly can't make any more progress, the issue might not be a lack of attention. At times, an internal transition glitch in the game can leave the puzzle in an unsolvable state. This can happen especially in more complex sequences, such as the cockroach puzzle, where the order of actions seems to make all the difference. If you've already tried reviewing the clues, interacting with everything around you, and still can't find a way out, insisting on it might just waste your time. In that case, open the menu and choose to restart the current stage. The game will reload the correct state of the puzzles for that section, usually without erasing a significant part of your progress. It's a much more practical solution than continuing to repeat actions in a situation that might have caused a soft lock. I know that restarting a section can feel frustrating, especially when you believe you were close to the solution. But in my experience, it's better to lose a few minutes than to stay stuck for hours trying to fix a broken state. Think of this feature as a safety button. Use it when you're sure the puzzle is no longer responding as it should. Absolutely read every note, letter, and to-do list you find. Much of this information isn't just there to set the mood or flesh out the story. They frequently reveal the correct order of actions and explain details the game expects you to notice before trying to solve a puzzle. A seemingly simple sentence like, "doesn't like cold feet," might be the exact clue needed to understand what to do next. Schedules, habits, and character preferences can also point out the correct sequence of a routine. Therefore, don't just skim through texts thinking you've already figured out the situation. I recommend investigating tables, walls, and anywhere a note might be hidden. Some puzzles seem completely nonsensical when you only look at the objects, but become much clearer once you read the related document. Sometimes the solution isn't about combining items, but about correctly following a written instruction. In my view, this is one of those games where reading is part of the solution, not an optional activity. If you ignore the notes, you might end up trying random actions and getting frustrated with puzzles that were meant to be understood through context. Read everything carefully, because the next clue might be right on the piece of paper you almost left behind. Servant of the Lake follows a logic very similar to Rusty Lake. It mixes ordinary, day-to-day tasks with completely surreal situations. You might be tidying up the house one moment, and the next, trying to perform an alchemical experiment, or interact with something that seems to make no sense. That's why when standard logic doesn't work, don't be afraid to try a strange action. If a solution feels uncomfortable, absurd, or even morally questionable, there's a good chance the game is expecting you to think precisely that way.
Rocking a baby or squashing an insect using a fruit might feel wrong, but that kind of exaggeration is part of the puzzle's language. The most important thing is not to limit your attempts to what would be reasonable in real life. Observe the objects around you and think of unexpected combinations, even if they seem ridiculous at first glance. In a game like this, the absurdity is often not a random detail, but the clue that you're getting closer to the answer. I like this approach because it turns each puzzle into a kind of bizarre experiment. When everything seems stuck, stop asking, "What would a normal person do?" and try thinking, "What would be the strangest thing this game would allow?" This shift in perspective can reveal solutions you would never find by relying solely on everyday logic.